it would make technical sense. So the ISP community was looking at it. Actually, in 2005, a huge submarine cable cut happened in the Karachi Bay, leaving Pakistan at the time, it was a long time ago, in a total blackout for even, I think, 2 weeks. And at the time, PTCL, so the major ISP of Pakistan, thought about bringing more connectivity towards India. So you had this project which came, and in 2008, they built a cable between Lahore and Amritsar, which are very close cities. But the cable was operational, but no commercial data ever went through it because of the security apparatus from both countries. And the thing is, you see that now in Pakistan, even with all these different failures, connectivity with India is completely out of the picture.
You're listening to Ping, a podcast by APNIC discussing all things related to measuring the internet. I'm your host, George Michelson. This time, I'm talking to Nowmay Opalinski from the French Institute of Geopolitics at the Paris 8 University, which is in Vincennes, Saint-Denis in the north of Paris. Nowmay is doing a PhD there and is part of the GEODE research project, which looks at the geopolitics of the data sphere and the associated cyber strategies. Nowmay and I discuss the GEODE methodology, looking at the routing of Pakistan. With a population of almost 240 million and located at the head of the Arabian Sea, Pakistan has a remarkably fragile global internet connectivity. Its dependency on subsea fibre optical networks has been tested over 22 times in the last 20 years. Nowmay has been exploring why this is, using measurements from routing, the RIPE NCC's Atlas system, the GEODE methodology, and also interviews in country with members of the technical community. Nowmay, welcome to Ping.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
So before we begin, can you just tell people a little bit about yourself? You're based in Paris, is that right?
Yes, I'm based in Paris. I'm a PhD candidate in geography, looking at also the political angles of geography at the French Institute of Geopolitics at Paris 8 University. I'm also part of the GEODE research project, which stands for Geopolitics of the Data Sphere.
Right. So Paris 8 is really more of a social sciences university. It's not really hard science, technology, microchips, networking. This is an odd place for you to be looking in our sphere.
Yes. So we are a little bit of outsiders in this world of, computer measurements and looking at the internet infrastructure. But we have a research team looking at how the internet is being impacted by social political factors. So at GEODE, and we have different researchers working on different regions of the world, looking at how the infrastructure of the internet in a country is being impacted by the local conditions within this country. So I've been working mostly on Pakistan, as we will see.
So I was at the AIMTech meeting, which was held in Sydney, and you gave a wonderful presentation there, really, really interesting, which was looking at this intersection of technology and geopolitics, in particular with reference to Pakistan. I think you published the paper with one other person from Paris 8, but also with academic from Lahore University. Is that right?
Yes. So we published a paper with Dr. Zartash Uzmi and my PhD supervisor from Paris 8 University, Frédéric Douzet. So definitely this research came from a bilateral research project between Paris 8 University and LUMS University in Lahore, Pakistan. It's also a project which mixes two teams, so a team of researchers from social science, geography, and computer scientists from LUMS. So it's quite interesting, the whole story, because I came to Pakistan to conduct my own PhD research. And I was kindly invited by Dr. Zartash Uzmi to come at his uni, but he didn't really understand at the beginning why a social scientist would come to Pakistan to study internet connectivity. So it was also a kind of a common research experience, trying to exchange our methodologies, and it was quite fruitful, I think.
So let's just set the scene before we drill down here. Pakistan is a large country to the north of India at the absolute peak of the Gulf of Arabia. So it's sitting there with this huge neighbour next door. Pakistan isn't exactly small, is it? It's got quite a big population.
Yeah, it has the 5th population in the world, so more than Brazil, actually. And the country has quite a big superficie, so it's quite a large country. But when you tend to compare it with India, it looks quite smaller indeed, but it's quite a large country.
Yeah, because India is, it's billion plus people. Pakistan is more in the 250 million, but this is a large economy, and it has a seafront, so it's not totally landlocked. It fronts onto the Arabian Gulf, and it's quite close to this part of the world that actually has a lot of oil-related income and technology. So the Gulf states, they're close, and India, which has a massive community online, is close. But you were unpacking a lack of resilience, a lack of robustness in their internet architecture. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, that is quite surprising, actually. Even in the technical community, people do not really understand outside of Pakistan why Pakistan's resilience is not so robust, because the country has submarine cable access from the sea, as you said. It's not a landlocked country, for example, as other countries in Africa, such as Chad or even Afghanistan. So normally, Pakistan should have enough choices of connectivity and have a resilient infrastructure. But how it all started, when I was doing my research in Pakistan, looking at the overall connectivity, people would ask me many times, so what about those submarine cables? They always got affected at the worst time. We hear it's sharks are maybe biting the cables. I mean, could you explain something about that?
There is a story that sharks have electromagnetic sensors in their body and that they're somehow attracted to the DC voltage that's passing down the cable. But I think we've got to say it's not going to be sharks, right? And we're talking about 6 cuts that happened in the immediate last couple of years, and it was a larger number over the last 20 years, wasn't it?
Yes. So in 2022, Pakistan experienced 6 major outages due to submarine cable cut. This also happened this year. Simiri 4 and AA1, I think, AAE1, which occurred in the Karachi Bay, but also in the Red Sea. And in the last 20 years, we have seen that more than 24 cuts had a huge impact on connectivity.
It's 24?
24, yeah, it's a lot. It's difficult to measure that. We had to rely mostly on the ISP's own reports, like public press release, when they had to actually acknowledge that they had an issue on the submarine cables, but there were maybe even more than this.
So that part of the world, is this particularly shallow water? Is this a frequent space for people to do bottom trawling? Are they exposed to more mechanical risks just by virtue of the geography?
So the thing is, most of Pakistan's submarine cable connectivity goes to the west, so to Europe. The most western point of its connectivity sits in Marseille, where it gets most of its European connectivity. And the thing is, these cables follow extremely busy sea lines. So the thing is, Pakistan is suffering from different disruptions happening along the way of these cables going from Karachi to Marseille, mostly in the Mediterranean Sea, especially also in Egyptian territory. You had a lot of issues there in the last decade, and now in the Red Sea. And you also have issues around Pakistan itself, especially in the Bay of Karachi, because the problem in Pakistan is that most of the submarine cables, all of them, are landing in one port city, Karachi, which is the biggest city of Pakistan, and which is extremely congested in terms of also sea traffic.
So there's going to be a large number of large commercial vessels mooring close to the port, which means putting down massive amounts of anchorage and chain.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what mostly happens. Now, of my understanding, they have some kind of monitoring system in the Karachi Bay. So, if a vessel comes very near the coastline, they can prevent this kind of event, but still it happened. And it happened this year in spring, actually, again.
So if you are a modern economy, it doesn't really matter where you are in the scale of things. You depend on the internet. So this cannot be good for the Pakistan economy. This is not helpful. And given that they have neighbors who are technologically advanced, they could be making use of India as a transit or alternate. They could be making use of Iran as a transit alternate. They could have a short fibre segment that took them direct into the Gulf states. Something else is going on here, Nowmay. So what exactly have you been able to unpack?
So that's typically what we came with our work. Actually, we did a lot of interviews and actually field work because we firstly mapped Pakistan's physical connectivity, and we have seen that almost no connectivity was there with India, with Iran also, but then you do not have any explanations of why. Even if you look at BGP agreements, you do not understand why Pakistan doesn't have disagreements with its neighbors, which would bring more resilience. So we went to interview the actual ISPs and at the IP gateways, and they explained that they face kind of political restrictions from the state.
Right.
Yeah. With India, everybody would understand that the relationship...
Oh, it's complicated. I've visited India for technical meetings, and a visa application form asks you about 15 different questions that essentially only have one quality. Do you have any association with Pakistan? It's a really strong focal point issue for them. But nonetheless, you would think that there would be some kind of connectivity, right? It would make sense.
It would make technical sense. The ISP community was looking at it. Actually, in 2005, a huge submarine cable cut happened in the Karachi Bay, leaving Pakistan at the time, it was a long time ago, in a total blackout for even, I think, 2 weeks. And at the time, PTCL, so the major ISP of Pakistan, thought about bringing more connectivity towards India. So you had this project which came, and in 2008, they built a cable between Lahore and Amritsar, which are very close city. But the thing is, the cable was operational, but no commercial data ever went through it because of the security apparatus from both countries. And the thing is, you see that now in Pakistan, even with all these different failures, connectivity with India is completely out of the picture. Though you have a lot of points which could be connected along the border, which would bring more resilience and even would allow some, smaller players enter the international transit business.
So you have a technique of looking into BGP to uncover the way the ASs along the path actually converge into a single one or 2 points, don't you?
Yes. So this methodology was actually built by Kaveh Salamatia, who was also part of the ANTech, I think, committee some years ago. So he's based at Savoie Mont Blanc University, and he's part of the GEODE research project. And so he built a platform, which is still not openly available, but which will be in the near future, which is bringing a lot of different BGP feeds from sources such as route views, even data from RIPE Atlas and Qaeda, and who also has additional probes, and which enable us to make kind of snapshots of the internet routes at a given moment. So basically, we have databases. Every 2 minutes, we have a database of all the visible BGP announcement from one AS to another, and which give us some kind of prior understanding, even though it's not complete, of the logical connectivity around the world. And from this, we use a platform which is called Gephi, which enables us to spatialize this data with graphs. And then we come,
That, I think, was the part that was most standout in your talk. You're doing these amazing flame charts of the richness of connectivity and the complexity of the network connectivity. We're on radio here, so I think we could both be waving our hands around trying to describe it. But I'll definitely try to include some links into your paper because these are stunning visualizations. They're really nice.
So basically we in the visualization, so you have a graph and you would see all the ASs being a node and the links being the BGP agreements. And so then we can have a geographical understanding of connectivity. So when looking at this graph, when looking at Pakistan's connectivity, so all of the ASs of Pakistan and its connections with the global internet, it becomes obvious that you have two choke points. And these two choke points are the two main ISPs, which are the international gateways towards the outside internet. And then it becomes very visual and clear that you have some kind of resilience issue because, AS concentration is not good for routing agility. And then it can bring issues. If one of these AS falls completely, the whole Pakistani network would be kind of cut off the global internet.
So it's typical in most economies for there to be really only 5 or maybe 10 key central ASs that provide most of the service to most of the users. This is normal. Pakistan, as an economy, has somewhere around 380 ASs. So it has quite a vibrant community of people who are looking at providing BGP service. But you just said they all converge on 2. So to all intents and purposes, 2 ASs determine the routing fate of everything that happens in Pakistan facing the rest of the world. That does not sound good.
Yeah, and that's point of failure. And the thing is, this situation is due to the physical concentration of connectivity. And there you see that physical connectivity and logical connectivity are closely interlinked because these two ISPs are the only one which are operating the landing station of the submarine cable. And then the whole problem of having few terrestrial connections with the neighbors come into the picture because smaller ISPs cannot draw links with India or either Iran. The only international connection can go through the submarine cables, which cost a lot of money, and then you have an over-concentration.
So there's no exploration of a connection through somewhere like Tajikistan that might be viable as another link into Europe and the West?
At the moment, I think it's not under exploration. Pakistan has only working terrestrial connections with Afghanistan, which is a client of Pakistan. But Afghanistan doesn't have the infrastructure to enable transit also, even though Afghanistan gains most of its connectivity through Central Asia. Actually, the Pakistani government and mostly the military is investing much more resource in connectivity with China.
Right.
There is a big question about this when I was there because the Pakistani government has funded with Chinese funds this new cable going through the Kunjalab Pass. And it was supposed to bring, a backup to Pakistan in case of submarine cable cut. But then when I came to talk with the ISP, they all explained to me that they wouldn't go through this path. And I asked why. And then there is the other part of the paper is that China does not host the content of interest for Pakistani users.
Yeah. So they incur transit and delay cost to use a service like this. It might give them resiliency, but in no sense is it equalized in terms of access to information services. It puts them at a disadvantage. Definitely. So if we kind of move from the measurement domain of looking at AS connectivity and the centrality of the AS, this is a really strange geopolitical outcome. It doesn't enhance Pakistan's availability for commerce, for electronic commerce, for messaging, for provision of services. It's not helping them.
Yeah, so what I understood by doing fieldwork in Pakistan is that mostly Chinese ISPs are interested in this in having a data corridor through Pakistan. So actually this cable is mostly used by one Chinese ISP, which is in Pakistan, China Mobile Pakistan, which is one of the major mobile ISP within the country. So they use it for their own traffic going to China. And then what is interesting also is that you have new submarine cable projects financed by some Chinese companies, which have their most eastern point, landing point in Pakistan, but which are funded with Chinese money. So what could happen is that Chinese data going through from Middle East, Europe, and East Africa could go through the Pakistani territory to China through this alternative path. And then there is a whole politics around that because different stakeholders within Pakistan want to be the transit provider. So let's see if this happens, but I think that this cable would be mostly used for that purpose. Though I think that the Chinese ISPs also sell some transit to Hong Kong, but I'm not sure it's very fast in terms of, latency.
Yeah, they may be doing sub-rates, which often wind up being a significant disadvantage because it's kind of a weird economy. If you split part of the bandwidth on a long path off to someone else, you can't sell the other fragments. So there are qualities here that nobody particularly wants a man in the middle unless there's a reason to break the data out. And if you break the data in a fatter pipe, you're left with little bits. It's hard to sell.
Yeah,
So did you see any signs that people were looking at mechanisms like Starlink or other low-orbit technology to provide better connectivity? Because it does seem like it would be a good fit. We know, for instance, it's used in Central Asia, in Mongolia. And even though there are no ground stations, they do a satellite transit path to get fairly low latency from Japan. So wouldn't this be a natural fit for Pakistan?
So I think that the Pakistani government is looking at it. I do not think Starlink is yet allowed in Pakistan, but the Pakistani government came last year with a national space policy, which is kind of landmark because it didn't happen since many, many decades. So now they are planning of, having more resources being invested in their own spatial agency, but also allowing new players in the broadband space. But the thing is, they came with this idea, but the time that these companies will come, I think it will take time because the thing is in Pakistan, the operating licenses are always kind of an issue. And the government usually makes a lot of money from it. So you always have issues around.
Yeah. So this is kind of that meeting point of the politics that mean they don't want to have relationships with a large neighbor that would give them resiliency, and the economics where they have this massive income stream. And if they diversify their path, the likelihood is they'd see drops in income. So from a government perspective, it's almost the rational choice. Yeah, let's leave things as they are. But it's not good.
Yeah. There are a lot of issues also at the mobile connectivity endpoint, especially related to spectrum availability in Pakistan. And there is also this kind of issue because the spectrum auctions are in dollars, actually. So it's extremely expensive. And also the price is extremely expensive. So they have been announcing 5G auction since a long time, since maybe 3 years, I think, when I started my PhD, and it still did not happen. And there are a lot of negotiations around that. So, but because the government is in shortage of, money, I mean, the Pakistani state is facing a deep financial crisis. They are still at IMF now.
Yeah.
And the thing is, within the ministries, you have tensions because the Ministry of IT every time try to explain that to have a resilient internet, a good connectivity within the country, they should leave the spectrum to the ISPs. They should also lower the right of way for, landing fibers. But the thing is, all the other institutions within the government do not have an interest. And usually it's Ministry of Finance, which is pulling the strings, and they just look at the final income and they have to find the funds. So finally, they lose at the end.
So have you been able to generalize your approach to doing this analysis in a way that means you could use it in other places? You mentioned that there are terrestrial landlocked economies like Chad. Have you potentially thought about using the same technology to look at them?
So other colleagues of mine are looking at other regions. So Some of my colleagues are looking at Western Africa, for instance. They've been looking also at this submarine cable cut around the West African coast. I have also colleagues working more on the low orbit satellites in northern Canada, in Nunavut territory. So different kind of studies. One of my colleagues is also working on the Pacific Islands in the South Pacific, so looking at the connectivity in these places. And you see that there are commonalities everywhere, but also differences due to the local conditions. But what is very interesting is that you have two kind of big phenomena that we see. You have a phenomena of concentration of the infrastructure of the internet around the platforms in each of these regions. So the platform and content is driving the connectivity everywhere. You have some kind of a flattening of the internet. And in the other way, you have also some kind of fragmentation along new borders of the internet. So government trying, to rein in where the data goes. It depends from one country to another. But these two phenomena are happening at the same time. And it brings a lot.
It is quite strange because the primary influence that we're all attuned to is the centrality thing, the way that increasingly assets of internet technology are coming into a small number of providers' hands. Provision of DNS is essentially now within the hands of 10 or 15 entities, 10 or 15 routing ASs. But simultaneously, routing isn't as important as it used to be for most people because most content is in a CDN close to where you are. But I have a feeling that the Pakistan market hasn't yet had a large interest from the CDN providers to put content local. I'm assuming that there's still some tension around that. After all, the Pakistan YouTube incident was kind of notorious as an example of them attempting to put social controls on people's access to this data. So are CDNs actually coming to Karachi and Lahore?
Yes. So now you have more CDNs in these cities of Pakistan. I mean, all of the big ISPs declare that they have CDNs at the moment. The only issue is that some CDNs are still not there. I think Amazon is still not in Pakistan, Microsoft either. So it helped to bring more resilience. But still, CDNs are only hosting passive content. So all what is active content, meaning that you need to have a constant interaction with the servers, especially related to, video conferencing, WhatsApp, this kind of things, still need to go outside of the country. So it helped somehow. But still,
but it helps for the static content. Whereas if you need active engagement, like government forms, submitting forms to hospital, fetching and sending radiography images, that's not really going to help you, is it?
The Pakistani government has been trying to enforce the platform to come and store the data within the country. During the previous government, actually didn't work. The Asia Coalition, which is Asian Internet Coalition, which is kind of the lobbying platform for these big content providers, have threatened actually the Pakistani government of leaving the country. So you see that there is some kind of an asymmetry of power there. So you have two things to it.
Yeah.
The thing is now they have CDNs, but it also brings new issues because in Pakistan, they have been developing internet exchange points since a few years, but the CDNs came before the internet exchange points. So what happens now is that the ISPs do not see any interest of interconnecting at the IXP, interconnecting with each other, because they all have their own CDN. So then you have this little fragmented network, and this doesn't help the whole concentration phenomenon. So
I think we've seen this emerge in several economies, that it can wind up in a situation where it's rational for ISPs to exchange data internationally instead of having a national link, because they both see some weird financial or business advantage in it. And you look at it and think, oh man, your dependency on that offshore connectivity, that is so dangerous.
Yes. And when I went to talk to them, asking about the IXP, are you connected at the IXP? Do you bring some data there, traffic? They would say, no, but this is outdated. We do not need IXP. We have our CDNs, and CDN becomes an edge within the competition between themselves. So the thing is, they only think about the competition between themselves. And once you have this content of interest, then you have a better service to your clients. And then you see that there is no collaboration between the stakeholders also at the local level.
Well, you've got to hope that this is only a phase and that ultimately we're going to see a more cohesive, more connected service, because this doesn't sound to me like a useful trend. So do you have an extra stage? Are you thinking of a next round of activity here? What happens next in this project?
So what happened next? We already have data on the domestic situation, because the paper was mostly looking at international connectivity. And so we conducted interviews, and now we would like to supplement this with quantitative data, because we mostly do qualitative analysis at the moment. The issues we face in Pakistan is that we do not have many vantage points for measurements. So now we are trying to increase the number of ripe atlas probes within the country, both at the geographical level, so have more geographical dispersion of the probes, and also at different ISPs, because otherwise you do not have a good understanding of the whole connectivity. And what we want.
So are you a ripe ambassador? Are you a probe ambassador? Because we have had a project of encouraging uptake. And if you're telling me there's inadequate coverage in South Asia, that's something we're going to have to look at.
Yes. I mean, we are trying this hard, and actually it's bearing some fruit, because now Dr. Zartashuzmi is in touch with someone at RIPE NCC, and they are closely working together. And also they have been installing a QAIDA anchor, also thanks to some links, etc. So it's changing. But when I arrived in Pakistan at the time, there were no probes, maybe 2 or 3, but it was not relevant to conduct this kind of measurement. So now what we would like to try to do is to measure internally the dynamics of the transit, to, show also to the ISP this concentration phenomenon, and also look at the IXP traffic itself.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of the scope of what we would like to do on the internal base.
So we do tend to have a lot of quantitative measure on ping, but it's interesting that you went with qualitative measure in your heart. Did you have a language barrier here? Have you had to pay for translations? How were you doing the collection?
No, so it was mostly in English. It was kind of smooth because all of these companies in Pakistan were in English mostly. So even all the technical details are talked in English. So I didn't have issues around that. I was even allowed to speak with a lot of people, even with the engineers. And I think that was kind of an important point of this research, is that we didn't want to talk only to the management. We wanted to talk to the engineers, because most of the management, sometimes they do not know what's going on with the traffic. They just have some kind of targets, like commercial targets, but they do not know where the traffic goes. And when you go to talk to these people, then it becomes very interesting.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting fusion of social science and technological measurement. I really, really like that you did this work, Nowmay. I think it's fantastic. So thank you very much for coming on Ping and talking.
Thank you so much, George, for this wonderful talk. I'm really glad you gave me this opportunity of presenting this work, and I hope we will come with more work, and that other people will try to do this kind of study with social science and computer science methodology being mixed.
Yeah, I think it's good. Thank you.
If you've got a story or research to share here on Ping, why not get in contact by email to ping@apnic.net or via the APNIC social media channels. Also, remember the measurement at apnic.net mailing list on Orbit is there to discuss and share relevant collaborative opportunities, grants and funding opportunities, jobs and graduate placings, or to seek feedback from the community on your own measurement projects. Be sure to check out the APNIC website for all your resource and community needs. Until next time.